walking as I'm talking, so if I start walking around, don't mind me, I'll figure a way around. But I did want to share with you all a conference paper I wrote for the Society of Appalachian Historians. They asked me to speak, and I went down there to them at Athens, Georgia, and talked about Confederate nationalism. Confederate nationalism specifically at Cumberland Gap, and it's a neat situation at Cumberland Gap. It's a strange situation. I hope you enjoy the little talk, and I'll be happy to answer any questions afterwards you might have. And I'd like to commend you all probably after the speech about what the job you're all doing and the great advice you gave of not giving that knee-jerk reaction to what's going on today in the news. But I'll get started. Like I said, if I start walking around, don't mind me. I'll find my way around. The title is Diehard Rebels, Loyalty in Bushwhacker Territory. All of whom ought to be shot, Confederate Brigadier General James H. Clanton vehemently declared to Colonel George G. Garner, Chief of Staff of the District of the Gulf. A mutiny had just occurred within Clanton's brigade stationed in Pollard, Alabama. Clanton's immediate superior officer, Major General Dabney H. Maury, concluded to Secretary of War James Seddon that a peace society entered our army at Cumberland Gap. Clanton's troops were relatively new and had not been stationed at the Gap. However, the reputation of mutinous behavior acquired from a specific area requires investigation. Alabama units that occupied the Gap from September 1862 to July 1863 experienced mass desertions. However, does this indicate a lack of willingness to fight for the Confederacy or evidence of a peace society's infiltration of those units? Kenneth Noe's book, Reluctant Rebels, the Confederates Who Joined the Army After 1861, identified age, camaraderie, Christian duty, and the greater demands of home as main reasons for the Southerners to delay their enlistment. But what of the Confederates who joined and then deserted? Did they see those duties as more important than service to their nation? This paper is concerned with the reasons for such large desertions at Cumberland Gap from a single Alabama unit. Andrew Lang posed the question, how did garrison soldiers fit within a nationalistic mold when stationed in relatively static isolation and prevented from marching, campaigning, and fighting in the war's grand battles? This paper takes the question and applies it to the Gap and argues that isolation, starvation, agitation by peace seekers, lack of purpose, and more importantly, the paranoia from occupying a hostile environment filled with bushwhackers led to their desertions, not a lack of nationalism. East Tennessee's pro-unionist leanings and treacherous acts towards the Confederate government led many commanders to blame East Tennessee as a hotbed for infiltration of their commands with peace society rhetoric. Maury had run-ins with the mutinous East Tennesseans during his time in the region. To quell the populace, he arrested East Tennessee officers as well as privates for belonging to this same peace society. The society threatened the very fabric that held the Confederacy together. A motivated citizenry was deeply important to supply the army with troops and grow crops for sustaining the armies. Fighting a war on the battlefield and the home front is not an ideal situation for a budding new nation. The 59th and 60th Alabama Infantry Regiments were originally part of Hilliard's Legion. They hardly ever stayed in one place altogether. Various commanders scattered them throughout East Tennessee from the fall of 1862 to summer of 1863. East Tennessee's Union population concerned commanders and soldiers alike. Bowling Hall Jr., a captain in Hilliard's Legion, noticed in his journey to Cumberland Gap that the people here are very hostile. They all openly confess their love for the Yankees. You find about 1 in 20 who is true to the South. The women are here and talk as they please, which is decidedly hostile to us, and make no secret of having sons fighting for the Union. The impressions that mountain people gave the Alabamians certainly did not comfort the Southern soldiers or give them reason to defend a land full of traitors. Not only did the Unionist sentiment play havoc on the psyche of men by having enemies in front and behind, Hilliard's Legion moved around constantly, only to be garrisoned at the Cumberland Gap once again. The uncertainty of their destination made them question their purpose. A brother to Bowling, Lieutenant Johnny Hall, regretfully reported that we lost 13 more of our men by desertion on the march here today. There came very near being a mutiny among the men. 4, I think, deserted from our company just in the last hour. After roundabout trips to the heart of Alabama and back, Hilliard's Legion lost more troops to desertion. Hall admitted the men did not like being ordered from the Gap to Bridgeport, Alabama, and then right back to the Gap. It is hard, but no patriot would act as some of them have acted. Hilliard's Legion definitely shows a predisposition to mutiny, but as argued here, it can be attributed to the conditions in Appalachia more so than a lack of loyalty. Desertions and traitors filled the letters of officers in Hilliard's Legion as a result of peace seekers' conscription into Confederate service. On an early summer night at Cumberland Gap in 1863, nearly 30 men of Hilliard's Legion scampered into the dark Kentucky mountains, coaxed on by an older man named Gilbert McInish, whose substitution for a richer man diminished any love for the Confederacy the man may have had. McInish led his comrades out of the Cumberland Gap like Moses out of Egypt. A few souls snuck out of camp at night to avoid being detected and coordinated a meeting place in order to regroup and travel home. Unfortunately, some officers got wind of the escape and a manhunt began to sniff out the deserters. 2 were found immediately, and one of those men sang like a canary as to the location of the meeting under the interrogation of Bowling Hall. Lieutenant Davy investigated the meeting place and captured 2 others. By the end of the night, 17 deserters successfully escaped from their unit. The captured men were placed in ball and chains and confined to the guardhouse. McInish had caused trouble and incited men to abandon their posts since his involuntary service began. Adjutant for the 2nd Battalion of Hilliard's Legion from Alabama, Crenshaw Hall, commented that the old man came very near being hung in Atlanta for expressing his disdain for the new Southern nation. From the time he mustered into Hilliard's Legion, he cursed the Confederacy and cheered for the Union and Yankees. With no correspondence from Gilbert McInish to be found, historians will not know completely why this older gentleman opposed the Confederate government and sought to implode the unit to which he was assigned. However, McInish was not the only man of Hilliard's Legion to speak against the Confederacy. Eli Williams, before the mass escape, declared his opposition to the Confederacy and cursed all who supported it. For that offense, Eli was placed in ball and chains and put on trial. From the records, neither Eli or McInish were punished other than being placed under arrest in the guardhouse. Alabama officers considered the deserters big traitors and saw regular Army service as a way to keep soldiers in line. Crenshaw was a huge proponent of Braxton Bragg. He believed Bragg was overwhelmed by the voice of demagogues and traitors for attempting to enforce discipline in his army by shooting 1 or 2 deserters. The officers saw life in the larger campaigning armies as a solution to AWOL soldiers. If we had a few more Braggs, and a Bragg for president, and a Bragg for governor of Alabama, perhaps desertion would not occur so often. But I suppose demagogues must be heard first. Crenshaw railed to his father. Unlike his brothers, Crenshaw rationalized the desertions as being a combination of the men's rations being significantly reduced and men like McInish and Williams entering the Army and being disloyal. Many men refused to drill because no meat could be obtained and only grains were available for consumption. The guardhouse held those men as well. Confused at the circumstances, Bowling Hall exclaimed, "The officers are allowed exactly the same rations that the men have." Crenshaw was hopeful that if we can only feed others who would be true if fed properly, but who won't stand the test of starving a little, the desertions would dwindle down to a few true traitors. Many deserters apparently left from the lack of provisions provided, and only a few of the deserters looked to be completely against the Confederate government itself. The rough conditions around Cumberland Gap further depressed the soldiers, especially the ones already discontented. Paranoia and anxiety from local guerrillas and horse thieves only made the soldiers unsure of their duty and purpose in the war effort. The Appalachian Mountains around the Gap afforded guerrillas with plenty of secure hiding places, making them more effective at harassing the enemy troops as they left the confines of Cumberland Gap's fortresses. The garrison came under dire straits for food and resolved to travel deeper into Kentucky in search of food. Many times they returned to camp with possums, coons, and other rodents to feast upon. Foraging expeditions were gambles because of the high rate of guerrillas and citizens who opposed the Confederates. Some troops from Hilliard's Legion and the 43rd Alabama went in search of food across the Cumberland River, 13 miles north of Cumberland Gap, in late March 1863. Bushwhackers and guerrillas plagued the band of soldiers so much that an armed guard had to be sent to the Cumberland Ford to guard the ferry in order to bring the expeditionary soldiers back to the south side of the river. The leader of the foraging party had been killed on the trip, but the force captured 7 or 8 bushwhackers who had killed the leader. Johnny Hall took stern measures attempting to stop the bushwhacking by arresting some of the more prominent citizens and telling their families if any Confederate units were fired upon by bushwhackers that the arrested citizens would be shot. As long as those people stayed in Confederate custody, the bushwhackers ceased their operations. Common thieves tormented the troops occupying the Gap, which pushed them to take offensive action. The Alabamians took action against the owners of a house that purportedly helped conceal bushwhackers and helped them evade Confederate authorities. On a March night, the house entertained a party for the locals, but the officers of Hilliard's Legion heard that a bushwhacker and horse thief named Morgan Pierce was in attendance. A lieutenant and 15 men hastily converged on the house and divided into 3 squads of 5 men each and surrounded the establishment. The officer stepped into the house and the crowd, being utterly astounded, broke into a frenzy, causing as much noise and confusion as possible. In the commotion, the thief was smuggled upstairs. Curious about the situation, he stuck out his head out of the boards on the side of the second floor of the house, to which a soldier on the ground yelled, "Take your head in or I'll blow it off." The lieutenant inspected each individual before heading up to the second floor to sniff out Pierce. Before he could go upstairs, 2 ladies walked down and joined the crowd. After investigating the upstairs, no thief was found, and the officer disappointingly returned to the partiers. The women petitioned him to let them leave the house while he continued his search. A very queer-looking woman sitting down with a baby in her arms caught his eye, and as he granted the women's leave, he grabbed her and jerked off her bonnet. She, nearly fainting, confessed to being the outlaw the soldiers were hunting. Thinking that he would be shot on the spot, the crowd begged for his life, but the rebels planned to have him a trial. Pierce pleaded with the soldiers to allow him to exchange the female apparel for men's clothing, but the troops cheerfully declined. He was thrown into the guardhouse in his petticoats and languished there until the next morning. He was brought before the commander of Cumberland Gap, General Archibald Gracie III, still dressed in his favorite costume. The robust general fell out of his chair laughing upon hearing that the gentleman in the petticoat was the infamous horse thief. Bowling Hall Jr. Predicted that the poor fellow would be shot as soon as possible even after giving the whole garrison a good laugh. We have no records of what happened to him after the trial, if he was on trial, but needless to say, he probably was either thrown in jail or executed for stealing Confederate horses and killing Confederate soldiers. The Hall brothers received disappointing letters from home talking about the pitiful state in which the citizens of Alabama found themselves. From the letters, Crenshaw, John E., and Bowling Jr. heard about their fellow Alabamians thinking about surrendering to the United States and talking about how the Confederate cause was a lost one. I fear that an element will be reared in our midst more destructive to us than the landing hounds Copperheads can ever prove to the North. Crenshaw confessed to his father. Clearly, he envisioned the South's Copperheads rising up and destroying the new country from within. He also believed there to be a large Reconstruction party in Alabama and Georgia with hundreds of downright traitors in both states. This fear of inner destruction probably grew the fear of traitors in their own midst. The Hall brothers, vehemently loyal to the Confederacy, made any action against the Army as an act of disloyalty when more factors greatly contributed to the desertions. Crenshaw questioned the regular citizens and Montgomery's loyalty by asking his father if they welcomed them Yankees with bloody hands to hospitable graves or with wines and cakes. The Hall family's loyalty to the Confederacy stands out because of all the disloyal soldiers and citizens spoke about in their letters. Crenshaw claimed, "Whether we are to lose every cent and every life in the Confederacy, I am still for prosecuting the war. And right now, I think we ought to turn our guns and bayonets against traitors at home and here in our Army." The seemingly disloyal soldiers, once involved in major campaigns, stayed with the Army. The outspoken cursor of the Confederate States of America, Gilbert McInnes, stayed with the Legion for months before he finally deserted near Knoxville. Other problem soldiers stayed with the Army that they had hated unless letters exist explaining their reasoning. The military records show them as being loyal even after leaving the Cumberland Gap. The other soldier loyal to the United States, Eli Williams, stayed in Hilliard's Legion after leaving the Gap, but was unfortunately killed in action near Petersburg on July 30th, 1864. So he had even stayed with the Army long after they had left Cumberland Gap, even though he didn't like the Confederacy at all. The two main instigators of desertion within the ranks of Hilliard's Legion continued their military service once they went on campaign. The Confederate High Command knew of the Unionist sympathies in Appalachia, which probably led to their assumption that the peace society infecting their armies came from that region. Undoubtedly, soldiers in East Tennessee and Southeast Kentucky made contact with members of the society, and their already discontented souls pulled them away from the Army. But that does not indicate a disloyalty to the Confederacy. Organized desertions at the Gap were arranged and planned by openly Union men that enlisted against their will. The soldiers at the Gap suffered from paranoia, bushwhacking, starvation, and a lack of purpose. When those factors are coupled with Union men planting ideas in their head, the resulting factor is desertion on a large scale. Soldiers garrisoned in Appalachia would have similar experiences, and when the High Command looked at Appalachian soldiers as a whole deserting on that large of a scale, their presumption would be that the Peace Society men had got their hands on their troops, or the men were disloyal. Appalachia, encompassing East Tennessee, Southeast Kentucky, and Southwest Virginia, made commanders leery, and for good reason. The conditions in the region promoted desertion, not disloyalty.